Hey, this is LOA Today, the Law of Attraction show. Welcome to LOA Today. Walt Thiessen and Joel Elston here. Welcome to LOA Today. Walt Thiessen and Joel Elston here. It's Thursday, October the 20th, 2016. And Election Day is around the corner. People are freaking out left and right. The debates are turning into witch hunts and all kinds of things are happening. Although, Joel, you and I wouldn't know because we haven't been paying any attention.
Yeah, we have. I've not really been affected by it except the occasional random Facebook post that I haven't had the chance to block that person.
Yeah, right.
But that's all I'm hearing about it. But I'm certainly feeling the vibes of everyone very concerned about this election on both sides.
Oh, yeah. And the one thing that you can always count on in an election cycle is you can even be doing what we're doing, blocking out the news, just total news blackout, and it still seeps in. Because there's always people who are asking, what do you think about how Trump is? And, Clinton's going to ruin the country and blah, 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 blah. You can't get away from it entirely as much as you try.
Well, and I really am a strong believer, as you know, that our country is, and our economy and the way we feel about things is really simply a perspective that we tend to view. And I think that for years, and again, not getting into political sidings or not, because I don't support either candidate, but years ago, when I was quite a bit younger, and really the first election that I was sort of paying attention to is our country had Jimmy Carter as a president, and Jimmy Carter was a good man, very good man, and he said, we need to cut back. We're going to run out of oil soon. We need to turn our thermostats down. We need to wear sweaters in the winter, turn our lights off. Let's conserve.
Gas rationing, I remember that.
Yeah, gas.
Lines and lines at the gas stations.
And just really, really trying to tell us how bad things were.
Yep.
And
in fact, he had a rather famous or infamous speech. We are a nation in crisis, he said.
Yes. And so he laid that out. So once the president says we're a nation in crisis, we quickly became a nation in crisis.
Isn't that funny how that works?
Yes. And so, his presidency was a very good man. I think he's sincerely, when I say that, I think he's very sincere and really thought he was doing the right thing. And
he was really not. He was doing the worst thing he could do, and that was to destroy everybody's confidence and make everybody feel negative.
Well, and then the Iran takes hostages. We try we're like the Three Stooges in trying to rescue the hostages. We wreck helicopters. And it's just viewed as America was very weak at the time.
Followed soon by Russia invading Afghanistan, which made people feel even weaker.
Yeah, so we were all buying into that. Then all of a sudden, here comes this guy, and he has his hair slicked back. He's a Hollywood actor, and he goes, are you kidding me? We're the United States of America. We want to turn up our thermostats. We want to buy bigger cars. We want to, and people are like, oh my goodness. So he wins in just a landslide.
Oh yeah, it wasn't even close.
It wasn't even close. And so now the economy didn't change instantly, but the attitude changed instantly. People were like, yes. I mean, the television show Dallas came on, and it was like, wow, let's live big, let's live large, and that's the message he brought to the table. And sure enough, it didn't take long before we bought into that. The 80s were a very up time for America. Most people view the 80s as a very positive period.
By the way, there was also another turning point there. It was during the end of the Carter administration, and people don't actually think of it too often as being politically oriented because, on its face, it wasn't. But that's when the Miracle on Ice took place. That was the year that the collegiate U.S. Olympic hockey team beat the massive monster Soviet Union hockey team in the Olympics. And
exactly.
It was the greatest upset in sports history, and it happened at the time when the U.S. was feeling least well about itself. From that point on, all of a sudden, people started to feel proud about themselves.
Well, and that became the view of the nation. We are, at that time we were quote unquote underdogs, and it was our amateur hockey team playing Russia's professional hockey team, and we were the underdogs and we won. Well, as this progression happened, I remember, I think it was Ronald Reagan's first 4th of July, or maybe the second, where he had spearheaded, and I think his wife Nancy actually did this, the money to redo the Statue of Liberty. And they had polished it up, and it was beautiful, and they had this massive fireworks display. He was there, and and he gave a speech about America. And whether you like Ronald Reagan or not, he showed strength. He convinced us we were the baddest asses on the planet. We had the most money, our economy. And now there's nothing in reality that was different than Jimmy Carter's president.
No. Actually, the inflation was higher at one point there during the Reagan administration than it was during the Carter administration, which was pretty high. It was double digit.
Yeah. And it didn't even matter. At one point, interest rates were 18%.
Yeah.
18%.
I mean, it's crazy.
And so, but it didn't matter because once we started to buy into the message, and it took over. And then for the next period of time it felt like the 80s were great. And then when President Bush 1 took over, that was fine. And people have a hard time reconciling this transition. But Bill Clinton also was a very charismatic man that made you convinced, proud to be an American and all this. So really we had a string of people in a row that, wow. I mean, they were great message deliverers, and they convinced you they were good speakers. And that's the role of a president. That's the role.
You actually touched on something there which has tremendously important impact from a law of perspective. A law of perspective? Yeah. A law of attraction perspective. in which both Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton, and to a certain extent George H.W. Bush, not quite so much, more Reagan and Clinton, were experts. They were masters of pushing emotional hot buttons. And they pushed the emotional hot buttons that made people feel better. That's really the big difference. That's what happened.
Yes. And that's what we're seeking. And so the reason that we're giving our audience a history lesson is not because you and I are certainly not political, and we're not trying to make the show political, but we're trying to see where our leader, if we understood our leader's job, in my mind, is to sell the concept of prosperity and everything's fine, we're getting stronger. That's and what's happened in this election, and again, not taking sides, it has broken down to no one's talking about how we're going to solve any perceived problems. It has become so personal. They're attacking each other. They're talking about how bad things are, how all these things are happening. So this message affects our people, the people that are listening. You start to buy into the fact that, wow, Russia's getting stronger, we're getting weaker, the economy's terrible. All these things that we're buying into, that we're being sold, is part of the process that neither candidate to this point has shown the ability to be positive and remain positive.
Well, I would even argue that the current election cycle certainly is kind of the zenith of being a high and low, but it's not the only one, I would argue. I would say even among the Clinton and Reagan administrations, but Bush, the first Bush and his son, and in the Obama administration, all of those election cycles there, they were getting more and more progressively into negativity, more and more progressively into terrible things are going to happen.
Right.
There were a few isolated things, like President Obama making change his campaign motto, so to speak. It was vague, and it had sort of a positive connotation to it, and so people kind of bought into that, and he did pretty well in the presidential election. So there was that. And for people who believe in universal health care, there was the promise of people who didn't have health care having health care after he got elected. So there's a couple of instances of politicians trying to improve the public morale. But most of it, I mean, I think about Bush versus Gore. I think about the follow-up election 4 years later when Bush got reelected. I think about Obama coming in. I think about Obama, his reelection campaign against McCain. Boy, there were a lot of negative stuff going on there. And then this cycle, it's It's reaching a tremendous high in negativity. It's just, and to be honest, this is really what people have been unintentionally and subconsciously demanding. Because,
absolutely.
I mean, you look at how Trump got the Republican nomination. He got the nomination by basically dissing everybody in a way using language that the Republican base would eat up. And they did. Right. And sadly, a lot of that verbiage includes sexism and racism and all this other kind of crapola that has nothing to do with having a happy, prosperous country. But they ate it up. Similarly, you can see the same thing happening over on the left. Bernie Sanders. I mean, let's be brutally honest here. If not for Hillary Clinton being the lead candidate, Bernie Sanders didn't have a hope in heck about getting anywhere. The only reason he did as well as he did was that Hillary Clinton is an abysmally bad candidate, not from the perspective of her political positions. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about her in terms of an emotional candidate tying into the emotional psyche of the country and getting people excited. She has exactly the opposite effect.
Right.
It takes that kind of candidate to be the lead candidate for a Bernie Sanders to do well. And once Bernie Sanders came into the picture, all of the left started doing the same kind of gyrations that the right were doing, but just doing it on left-wing positions rather than on right-wing positions, getting negative about how the climate is falling apart and how the world is coming in and the discrepancy between rich and poor and on and on. Corporations taking over the world. It's the same stuff, just different issues. Well, when you get a population that is just bound and determined to focus on negativity, guess what you get for candidates?
Well, and that's how we breed, and that's the just exactly like you're saying. That's how it got to the. If I were the head of the Republican Party, I would be so frustrated because just about anyone that was running would easily be beating Hillary Clinton right now.
You and I have a fun theory about that, but we aren't going into there.
Right. But anybody would have been beating her at this point, and the fact that they have the one candidate that possibly may be more negative or untrustworthy than she is. And again, we're not choosing sides. We're using the example of how the news media eats it up, and they will play a campaign tidbit from either candidate, and then they would have the supporter or the candidate themselves and say, so-and-so said this about you. And then they respond back, and they literally, it's almost like a middle school clique where this girl told this girl that she said this and she said that, and please respond. And they end up fist fighting. I mean, it's almost to that level.
Pretty much.
And so it's falling apart. And in the meantime, the American people then buy into the fact that, I know my dad, who's elderly at this point and a great guy, but he sits around and watches Fox News all day and is literally scared to death.
Well, that's his first mistake, watching Fox News all day.
Exactly. And I try to get him to turn it off. And I'm not picking on Fox News. It'll be CNN or any news.
It doesn't matter which network.
Yeah,
no.
Yeah. And so, but he's scared to death because they're trying to. The people that are interviewed and the program itself is often programming itself is often in charge of their goal is to make you as scared as possible. When you're scared, you're going to tune in every day like, oh my gosh, we've got to watch it, and that their ratings increase. So the media has bought into the negativity, and they perpetuate it, and we're in a vicious negative cycle. And while that is a clear path that we're on, it's unfortunate because that's what creates the perception. There's a lot of great stuff happening in our country. Things are, we live in a time, Walt, where the entire knowledge of the universe is available to be picked up on my little phone. I mean, it that amazes me. I mean, we got access to tons of information. There's great stuff happening in our world right now, but we're distracted with silly stuff.
That's really important to remember. With all of what we see in the news, that's only a tiny fraction of what actually happens, and almost all of what happens outside of the news is pretty good stuff. It's pretty darn good.
Yeah. Right. I mean, I know when in my life, as I talked about last week, I have a new foster son living with me, and he's an amazing young man who I just have really just have such a great connection with already. He's only been here a little over a week.
That's amazing.
And,
that's fantastic.
Yeah, and things are great. So, in our world, things are really good. I'm doing well financially. We have all of our needs are met. Everything is where it needs to be, and that's my reality.
I love the little thing that you posted, the little exchange you had with him that you posted on Facebook, where you talked about what he said, what you said, what he said, what you said.
Yes, he came home one day and he said, I really, really like being rich. And I said, hey, buddy, we're not rich. And he goes, we're a lot closer to rich than we are poor. And I said, that's a really good point.
Absolutely. Wow. I mean, talk about perspective and talk about, where do you come from? Yeah.
And that from his perspective, I guess, really, there's a lot of people. There's a saying that somewhere in the world right now, there's people praying for what you take for granted. And the fact that we have this stuff, we don't have any risk of worrying about paying the electric bill or having enough clothes or food, or, we drive a nice vehicle and he goes to a great school. He has a nice after-school program. So a very secure environment has been provided. And I take a lot of that for granted. But I guess if you look at it on a worldly standard, we're incredibly wealthy.
Oh, we are.
And I think our audience is too. And if you remind yourself of that, then you invite more of that into your life. And one of the things too, Walt, I'm glad you brought that up, because my initial reaction, this is still areas that I need to work on. When he says, well, I really like being rich. My immediate reaction, well, we're not rich, was like, oh no, that would be wrong if we were, or that, or I don't want to say that.
It's factually incorrect, so therefore we should never say it.
Right, but I guess I don't know what the definition of rich is, and in my mind, rich means you never ever have to work, and your money will pay you to spend as much money as you want to. That's my definition of rich.
Sign me up. I'm in favor.
That's great. But I guess the definition of, for some people who have been on a very low end, and I have been on a very low end, so I need to remind myself of that. Not having to worry about, I don't have to work for, if I didn't have an income stream for a year, I'm fine. If I, and probably longer if I wanted to lower my lifestyle, but I mean, if I could live like I'm living now for a year and not worry about it, have everything covered, all my needs met. That's pretty good.
Yeah,
that's
very good.
That's a comfortable place to be in. I'm not saying it arrogantly, but I'm saying it's a comfortable place to be in. So I need to remind myself that I don't need to be defensive about what that is, or I need to be more open to the concept that we are wealthy through a point of view. And the more I believe that, the more wealth, the more security, the more stuff that I will keep bringing into my life. That's really important.
Oh, it's very important. And in fact, it touches on something I struggled with for quite some time and have had to remind myself about over and over and over again. Because I've had more than my share of money troubles the last few years. And when you're at the lowest level of that, when you're in the depths of despair, that's the hardest place to try to say to yourself, I'm rich.
Yes.
But you have to find some way to see some wealth that's on your side if you want to climb out of it. It's a requirement. You absolutely have to decide, at least on some level, in some way, that you have wealth. Because as you pointed out, once you get that thought going, then wealth starts to happen. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be, one of the most wealthy people in the world by next week. That probably is not realistic. I'm not saying it couldn't happen. I'm just saying it's probably not realistic. But if you're even slightly more wealthy next week than you are this week, then you're wealthier. And that's the key point. Yes. That's what we have to remember. And when we focus that way, when we focus on the idea that I'm doing better, I'm wealthier, I am richer than I was, then we start reminding ourselves through that reinforcement that, there's a lot of good things going on in my life. Sure, I've had trouble. Sure, I've had problems. But there's a lot of good things going on in my life. And through focusing on that, that's where we get into the positive feeling. That's where we start feeling good about ourselves. That's where we start convincing ourselves that maybe there's a chance things could get better in our lives. And the more that we focus on that, that's when things start getting better in our lives. So, I mean, if there's anybody listening right now who's in kind of the same place, that's the best thing to do. Find those little things that are good. There are some things that are good. Very likely, if you're listening, you have some place to sleep tonight. It's possible that there are one or two who don't, but very likely everybody here has a place to sleep tonight. Well, that's a good thing. That's wealth. That's a form of wealth.
And that focus, there are people. There's tons of stories of people who don't have places to sleep that start to buy into this concept that one day become very, very wealthy because they live this way. They start to. We can keep. All of us can. I don't care where you are. All of us can find reasons to be upset or what isn't right in our life. And the old way of thinking, or the way that most of us were taught, was to focus on the things that are wrong and worry about them and just almost apologize when I said, "Oh, we're not rich." I shouldn't be apologizing for that. I mean, not that I'm rich by definition of Donald Trump or any of these other people, but I am in a lot of ways so much better off than other people, and that's where I want to live. I want to live in the abundance, and that's what I want our audience to do, to find where you do have abundance and live in that, and then you'll be bringing more to the table. The doors open up. Jim Carrey's a big follower of the law of attraction, and he talks, and I saw an interview with him, and he said one day he had an old beat up car, and he was really basically hanging on by a thread trying to be a comedian. And he would go somewhere in LA in one of the big comedy clubs, and when he would watch the big name stars of the time, and he would watch how they acted, and he envisioned he was standing on stage, or people were clapping for him, or the red carpet was rolled out when he arrived, and he literally envisioned that. And one day
he believed in it too.
He believed in it, and he became that one day. And he tells the story of, and I'm pretty sure the figure's $25 million, when he had nothing. When he had nothing, and he was really starting out on this, he wrote a check for $25 million to his father. And he said, one day this check will be good.
Wow.
And when his father passed away, it was right after he signed, I forget the mask too, the second mask, where he signed a big contract. He put that check in his father's casket, and it was good.
Wow.
Pretty impressive.
Yeah.
And it's something that is he believed it. He got there. And there's tons of stories about that. And I want, and if there is an audience member that is listening, that it doesn't have a place to live, or is facing not having a place to live, or facing anything, understand the more you focus on that, you unintentionally are bringing about the opposite of what you need.
Right. Which is why it's so important to focus on what would be so cool about the stuff that you do need.
Yes.
Right now, if you need a place to sleep, if you need to get some food, the first thing to focus on is not how hungry you are, but how good it feels once you have food.
Yes.
And how the nourishment makes your body feel better. Focus on that instead. The food will come a lot faster.
It will. And the abundance that exists isn't limited to just a few people. The abundance is available to all. It's being able to tune into the abundance, be able to find when you're thinking of abundance, you're living in abundance. And trust me, I'm the first one to tell you, when I had nothing and I had eaten out of a trash can and I've been homeless and all that stuff, I know what I'm asking. What Walt and I are asking at this point seems impossible when you're living in it. And that's the rub when most people find a hard time living in the law of attraction in a positive direction, is they don't understand that. How can I think you don't understand, Joel, what it's like to be hungry? Well, I really do. And I know that I was in such a negative downward spiral. The spiral kept getting deeper, and I perpetuated it with my mindset. And I live there. And so I have great empathy for understanding, but also am aware that the law of attraction is at work. It's at work whether you want it to be or not. We compare it to gravity often. Gravity doesn't pick and choose. It always works. The law of attraction always works. If you're using it, my life sucks. Your life is, yes, it does. That's what you're vibrating.
And it will continue to.
It will. It will continue to. The old adage, and I forget which speaker was saying this, but he believes, and I believe him as well, that if you were to take the entire wealth of the United States and divide it among every resident, that in 5 or 10 years, the wealthy people will be wealthy again and the poor people will be poor again. Because it's not a factor of money.
It's not a conspiracy theory.
Right. It's the fact that there are people that live in wealth. That's why lottery winners, probably 90% of the lottery winners that win are broke within a short period of time because they don't understand how to live in their wealth, in their abundance. And it just happens that way. I know people that spend their entire lives with the same issue, whether it's financial, whether it's relationships, whether you'll find these same issues that people deal with a lifetime, and it's because they believe that's their issue.
And I can also empathize on the point that you raised earlier about how it seems impossible when you're in that bad place. It seems impossible to find some way to feel good. That just seems totally out of reach. I've been there myself, and I'm still learning how the whole thing works, but I have discovered a few things along the way that surprised me each step that I discovered something. One thing that really surprised me was learning that I actually control how I feel. That for me was huge, Joel, because for the longest time I believed deep down you couldn't control how you felt. You could only react to what was going on around you. So you had to have good stuff going on around you in order to feel good. If you had bad stuff going on around you, you'd feel bad, and that was fate. That's just the way it worked. Which is interesting because I didn't believe in fate, but that's another story. But the point is that when you believe that, you become a pawn of the universe. And I recognized the argument. I recognized what law of attraction gurus were trying to say to me. I just didn't see how you could get there. How could you possibly control what you feel? I remember the first few steps, baby steps, tiny baby steps I took trying to learn to see, is there some way I can push myself? Can I push my feelings somewhere? And I couldn't do it. Nothing would work. And it wasn't until I started, I think at my wife's suggestion, I started focusing on weather, good weather, and just enjoying good weather and nature and stuff like that. Being out on a walk and doing that. It wasn't until I started to do that for quite some time that all of a sudden, I don't remember exactly where it happened, but all of a sudden one time I noticed that my mood changed quickly. And I said to myself, that seems kind of weird. How did my mood change so quickly? Well, it wasn't until after I thought about it for quite some time that I realized, actually, we're used to doing that. We're used to changing our mood quickly. You'll just go to watch a funny movie and your mood will change dramatically. Go to watch a scary movie in the opposite direction, same thing. You'll get a dramatic change in mood very, very quickly. But the idea that through just normal everyday experience that I could have a quick change in mood, that seems a little foreign to me for some strange reason. And I think that's part of the psychology of being in that bad place. You start to believe that your mood can't change quickly. So when I started changing quickly just by enjoying nature, it created a conflict in my head. Like, how can that be? And through that conflict, that's when I started to finally, very, very early stages of maybe believing, maybe I actually can influence my mood. Maybe I can actually change the way I feel.
Yes. And that's so huge, Walt, because this sums it all up, that we are not what happens to us. We are how we feel about what happens to us. And then your response is your choice. Your feeling is your choice. What you view is going on around you is your choice. All that, the filter, is your choice. There's an old And I would love to know who I hear all these things from, because I'm not trying to take credit for them. But I remember this parable, or sort of a short story, about a gentleman who, his newlywed wife, they move to a new home. It's not a new home, but an older home. They get married, they move into a home, and the first thing the lady says over morning coffee was, she's looking out at the neighbor, and that's back in the day where they were hanging their sheets up. They said, that lady must use cheap detergent because her sheets are dingy. And her husband's like, well, that's sort of an odd statement, but he sort of ignored it. And over a period of 3 or 4 months, every day that the lady would put out her laundry, she would comment. She said, I really need to tell her to buy some better laundry detergent. It's really bothering me that her sheets are so dingy. So one day she wakes up, they go down for coffee, and she looks out there. She goes, oh my goodness, she must have really bought that new laundry detergent. And I'm so happy for her. And her husband goes, I cleaned our windows. And the view in which you look at the world is, you're in control of that, the spectrum of what you're looking for. She was looking through a dirty lens. We're in control of our own lens. That's the piece that one of the experiments I do when I talk to a group of people, and if I do a public speaking in your area, I'm going to give a piece away, but somewhere in the room I will have this red dot that I'll put up on the wall. And I will tell the room to close their eyes, and when they open their eyes, I want them to scan the room and find the color red. Well, not only are they going to find my red dot on the wall, they're going to find a bunch of stuff around that they didn't see before, the color red. Now, only because they are now looking for the color red. And that is really important, their filter for red. Before, they were just filtering everything generally. When you focus on a certain thing, a more accurate thing is when you get a new car and you think, well, I have a unique color car or a unique car, and then all of a sudden you start seeing 30 of the same cars in the same day. You're seeing your car over and over going, how did it end up with a car like everybody else had? You weren't filtering for that car before. And these are things that we get to choose our filter. That's the exciting part of
it's
the law
also
of
one of the most
attraction.
confusing things, this whole idea of a filter. Because the filter is not just a metaphorical filter. It's an actual real filter in your brain.
Oh, it is. Well, the brain, if you want to get into the science of it, which would be really boring to most, but I've done a lot of research on the brain. And the brain intentionally filters out about 94% of what you see because it's not relevant to what you need to do.
And it's a good thing that it does, because if it didn't filter it all out, you'd be autistic.
Well, and that's where I was going. That's where people that don't understand autism is. Most autistic people don't have the ability to filter that 94%, so they're getting so much information they can't comprehend it. That's why the lack of eye contact, and it's really an amazing thing when you understand the brain isn't intended to take all that in, but you get to choose your filter. So when your filter, you can specifically look for things, and that's really important to me. When you say, I want to look for the positive, I want to look for the abundance, I want to look for that, your filter's then turned on for that, and that's what you'll see. That's what you'll invite into your life.
Which is a very cool concept,
that's what
because that's how you can drive a white car, and all of a sudden everybody seems to be driving white cars.
Right. I was very excited. I worked very hard to get here, and I'm just saying this because it's very relevant. I have a Porsche Cayenne. It's dark gray, and I love that vehicle. I've worked hard to get to a point where I can afford that. Well, I thought I was going to be about one of about 10,000. You have no idea how many dark gray Porsche Cayennes there are in Richmond, Virginia. There are tons of them, and I'm like,
the Porsche dealers are doing very well.
They're doing a lot better than I realized. And within that spectrum, I'm like, okay, I didn't see them before because I just wasn't tuned into them. And here's an experiment. If you're just driving today, say, pick a random car, how many Ford F-150s, how many Toyota Camrys, how many Honda Accords, or even get really unusual cars, and you'll be shocked at how many you'll see because you're filtering for that car. And the exciting piece that this is where the money shot, as I call it, for the law of attraction exists. you control your filter, and your filter controls your perspective when you understand to connect how to connect the two. And that's the beauty. That's how you control how you feel. Your filter can only be turned on if you want to see all the bad things, and that's where the media is killing us. That's where the politics is killing us, because it's reinforcing this is what's happening, and it's not really what's happening.
But it makes us see more and more of it. And so in that sense, it seems like that's what's happening.
Right. And I'm excited that I now understand that within inside of my brain there is a filter to say, wow, I get this now. I can look for the stuff. I mentioned earlier the reason I don't use my foster son's name is due to confidentiality. I cannot say his name. I'm not just calling him my foster son. Right. But my foster son is 11, just turned 11, and he is a great kid. Again, great kid. Now, he believes me fake spiders to try to scare me.
He's actually got a little bit of stereotype going on there.
Yes, he has a lot of stuff happening. There was a time in my life where, why are we wasting our time with all this stuff? I find it hilarious. He's great. I love the fact that he is still in that state. I can value that state, or I can be annoyed by that state. I get to choose which one, and I choose to love the fact that he's 11 and he's acting like an 11-year-old boy. I love that, and he's just an incredible kid, and I see that. I'm expecting him to be an incredible kid. He is an incredible kid, and he's behaving like an incredible kid. And that's what I see so often in dealing with children that have been in care, that a lot of people they're expecting these other things from them, and they behave exactly that way.
And it's so many different ways that this principle applies too. And we were talking about money, and you're talking now about dealing with kids and so forth. It applies to everything, though. Something that popped up this past week reminded me of how this applies to health. My mom is 87 years old and not in the best of health. I mean, she's not in bad health, but she hasn't really, her mindset hasn't been great. Let's put it that way. And she had a fall, fell to her knees, and ended up bruising her knees. And after they checked everything out, they found that she had hairline cracks in both knees and in one ankle. So she's been in the hospital for a few days, and now she's in rehab for the next 6 weeks or something like that. So I get on the phone with her because she's in Virginia, I'm in Connecticut. It's not like I can jump in the car and go visit her. So get on the phone and talk to her each day, or as many times as I can. And the first time I got on the phone with her, she was really depressed. You could hear it in her voice. And I'm saying to her, I don't know if you're aware of this, Mom, but laughter is actually truly the best medicine. She says, oh, yeah, I believe that. I said, well, there's actual science behind it. And I started to describe stuff that my sister-in-law, Iona, told me on this show about 1.5 years ago, 2 years ago, about the actual stuff that neuroscientists and biologists have been able to track within the body. They can actually study how when you laugh, within 90 seconds, it kicks off a whole endocrine system thing that sends healing to cells and starts activating enzymes, and all sorts of stuff starts to happen just because you laugh. And so I was telling her about that, and it was interesting to her. She said, yeah, it kind of makes sense, but she never really thought about it that way. Well, come to find out in my next conversation with her that she had decided to make laughter part of her day. Now, she wasn't having a good day. I mean, she's in a hospital. She's getting prodded and poked. She can't move around. She can't live her life. She can't do any of the things that she's used to. But she was getting some visitors, and of course she'd get the usual medical staff visiting her and stuff like that. And each time she found herself in a situation where she'd laugh at something. And she pointed out her conversation that she'd had with me about how important laughter is. And the people that she was talking to all agreed, yeah, laughter is healing. It will help. And it happened over and over and over again. By the end of the day, I ended up calling her that evening and found out from her this long series of stories of all the different ways that she had applied laughter throughout the day. The important thing to note is that the beginning of it, she was depressed, she was feeling down and so forth. By the end of it, just by having that one little project to do in her hospital bed where she couldn't do anything else, that project turned her entire attitude around. By the end of the day, she was feeling good. And what was even more amazing is that this 87-year-old woman was experiencing some pretty good progress on her very first day doing physical therapy. So does healing get impacted by your beliefs? Does it get impacted by what you think about? Yeah, in a big way.
Oh, well, that is, from personal experience, I relate to that so much, and I'm so glad you helped her discover that. And I know a couple of examples. Several years ago, I think it's about 6 years ago, I had to have my gallbladder out. A lot of people in my family do. It seems to be something we do.
It's a family thing.
It's a family thing. So I was actually working at a treatment center at the time, and it was about noon on a Friday, and I just had I knew I needed to have it done. I had a really bad gallbladder attack. And so I left, and it was about 11:30, and I went to the hospital, and they took the whatever they do, MRI or whatever they do, CAT scan on the liver, on the gallbladder, and said, "Oh yeah, it's got to come out today." So I said, "Okay, let's do it." So by 1 o'clock, I was under and in surgery. I mean, it was that quick. It was boom, boom.
Wow.
And I'm in great health. I feel wonderful. I get done. The doctor says, I said, "When can I go home?" And he laughed. He says, "Well, once you can walk around the entire top floor." I got my shoes on, literally walked around, and I said, "Can I go?" And he goes, "Don't be ridiculous." I said, "You have to spend a night here." That's probably about 3:30 in the afternoon. We're having that conversation. Finally,
so 2.5 hours after they started the operation.
Right? Yeah, I'm ready to go. So about 5:30, after asking the nurse and calling him multiple times, he said, "Just go home. Just go home. You're fine. And if something comes up, come right back, but just go home." And so I didn't even spend a night in the hospital.
Probably more out of exasperation.
Exactly. and he said, "Here's your," he gave me some Oxycontin's prescription. I said, "I won't need that." And he laughed. He goes, "Yeah, you will." So I appeased him and took it never got it filled. Went home, and I did take ibuprofen. I mean, there was pain. I just had surgery, but it wasn't, I was able to understand that's part of surgery is pain. The part of the story that I found amazing was there's a gentleman in the room right beside me, 2 years younger than I am, that also had his gallbladder removed the same day.
Mm.
He was talking about to the surgery how much pain he was in, how miserable he was. He had used up all his painkiller. You have that button you can press, and he needed additional painkiller, and he was constantly complaining about how bad things were. So I told him I was leaving. He just couldn't believe that. So I had left my charger for my phone there because I thought I was actually going to be spending the night. The following Monday, I went back to get my charger, and I'm just dressed in regular clothes, walking around normally, like no big deal. He's still in the bed complaining. Mm-hmm. The same surgery, two different perspectives.
Same day.
Yes. And I'd already started my life again, and even though I was supposed to wait 3 weeks to go back to the gym, I was having a light workout later in the day, which is not advised, but it was what I did. Yep. And so it's that's the piece that I want our audience to understand. So much of this is in your brain. Your brain has a healing ability, your attitude toward things. It makes a huge difference. And I'm also reminded of a case where, my mother recently, when I said I was going to be getting another foster child, as you know, both my boys, TJ and Chris, were from foster care that I eventually adopted. Her first reaction was, "At your age?" And I laughed and I said, "Yes, at my age." And she quickly realized that she was in a negative mindset and said, "No, you'll be fine." And she's, and I said, "Mom, I'm in great health. I'll be around plenty of time." I know a gentleman that was 65 years old, and he ended up marrying a lady who was quite a bit younger than him, who had a 4-year-old daughter. He was everybody was like, "Oh my goodness, he is never going to make it to her high school graduation. There's no chance of that. He's in horrible health." Well, once he married this lady and had a 4-year-old daughter, he instantly looked younger. He acted younger. He was going to things. He lost weight. His health improved. All this stuff happened because it needed to happen. Now, the daughter's grown, He was not only at her high school graduation, her college graduation, he gave her away at her wedding. And what an amazing story.
Sure.
He got younger, not because there's some magical pill he took. He got younger because he needed to get younger. He believed he was younger. He was a young father again. And these things, this mindset dictates so much. When I can show you pictures of a 70-year-old lady who does bodybuilding fitness contests, standing by a 70-year-old lady who believes she's an old lady. And it doesn't look like they're the same. I mean, it doesn't remotely look like they're 20 years, 30 years within each other's age range, or the same age.
Yeah.
This is all inside of us, Walt.
It is. It's totally inside of us. And it reminds me of one of my favorite Sean Akers stories. We haven't talked about Sean in a while, but we both love him. He's probably one of the nicest positive psychology guru people out there, although he doesn't position himself as a law of attraction guy. I mean, it pretty much dovetails. One of the stories he tells is about one of his 3 mentors at Harvard in the Department of Positive Psychology. And I can't remember what her name is off the top of my head, but she did a study back in the late 1970s, early 1980s, in which she invited a group of geriatric men in their 70s, early 80s, to come in as part of this study. And what she had them do was basically leave all their stuff at the door and be in a confined space, a set of rooms for, I think it was for a week. And within that week, they wore badges that had their names on them and pictures of themselves when they were 20 years younger. And then, this was in the 70s, the rooms that they were in were filled with magazines from 20 years before in the 50s. And the pictures on the wall were pictures of iconic figures from the 50s. So basically they were in an environment that would remind them of all the stuff that they knew and saw when it was the 1950s and they were in their 50s. And their instructions were, pretend that you're back at that age again. Pretend that you're in your 50s again. Before they started the study, they took all the vitals. They took a whole bunch of physical measurements, so everything from strength and health, and what kind of conditions do they have, and how's their eyesight and their hearing, and I mean everything was measured. Do they have a strong heart? Are they suffering from diabetes? Everything was measured and tracked. And then a week later, they took all the same physical measurements again. And what was truly amazing is that every single one of these men exhibited dramatic improvement toward appearing younger. They had better health. They had, believe it or not, better eyesight. I still don't understand how that happens. But they, on average, measured 10% better eyesight after 1 week of pretending they were 20 years younger. The ones who had medical conditions, their conditions had either lessened or gone away. It was such a groundbreaking study that literally her colleagues in the same field refused to believe the results of the study.
Yes. I love when there's examples of the mind. The mind has the ability to cure the body. It can go backwards in time, in a sense, and really adapt. I have one of my personal experiences with a friend. I get a call from a friend's wife down in Florida. He's a neurosurgeon, really good guy. Does not believe in what we believe in at all. Just very much a science-based only person. He went to see his doctor, who referred him to another doctor. He had an anomalous test, and the initial result was that he had liver cancer. And it was they scheduled a couple weeks out. They needed to do a scan and see what stage he was going to be in, but the clearly the diagnosis was he had liver cancer. So I happened to be going down to Florida, and already when I heard this, so I needed to change my trip to go by and see him. So I stopped in, and I was shocked at what I saw. This vibrant man had probably lost 19 pounds in 2 weeks, wasn't eating. Oh. He was gray. And I'm like, oh, my God, he's dying quickly. And and he's like, oh, he said, I'm feeling horrible. I said, well, did you feel horrible before? And he goes, no. But once I found out, he said, I realized all the symptoms, and he started behaving as he had all these symptoms. Well, the great news in this story is when he goes to the oncologist and they do all these tests, they keep doing more tests and they keep doing more tests, and he's thinking, oh boy, this is really bad. And so the doctor comes in and he says, I don't know what happened, but there's been obviously there was a mix up in blood results or something. You're in perfect health. You have no cancer.
Oh my goodness.
And he's like, what? Went home,
yeah, what?
hit the gym, started working out, gained his weight back. I mean, within a week and a half, he's looking great again. And he finally, at that point, said, the stuff you talk about, Joel, has some merit. It really does. He said, I've always discounted it, but he said, I was killing myself because I believed I was dying. He said, it wasn't, mm-hmm. He said, and so he's been fascinated by this over time. And he's starting to buy into the sort of the neuroscience behind it all, the quantum physics behind it all, and he needs more of a science view of it than necessarily you and I present. But he's doing the research on that sort of that quantum level, and he's coming to the same conclusion. And
good for him.
And you mentioned Sean Acord again, that one of the great people is positive psychology. I find it interesting that the positive psychologist people are desperate to distance themselves from the law of attraction stuff, but in reality, it's the same thing. It's just, they don't want to be equated with some type of religious which is not, but some type of philosophical belief when they want to make it all about science. Well, you got to keep the
woo-woo. You don't want woo-woo in science.
Well,
science
exactly.
and woo-woo don't go together.
Exactly, and I get it, but it's just we have our audience has everything they need right now to have the life they want. The one thing that gets us up every morning, Walt, is the reason that you get up and I got up this morning is we have hope. There is hope that tomorrow or today first and tomorrow, right around the corner of what we need. And one of the things that I just am so blessed of having my foster son live with me, he has an incredible positive attitude. And one of his favorite sayings is, it's just right around the corner. It's just right around the corner. His birthday was right around the corner. Christmas is right around the corner. Everything's right around the corner. He's got this great perspective. He's so positive, and he's such a great guy. And he emanates. Everybody that meets him picks up on this real positive energy. And this is a real thing. You can either be defeated by everything that happened, or you can take whatever's happened to this point and say, it has no relevance on where I'm going. It only has relevance on what I give it. If you've been poor your entire life, it's not relevant unless you make it relevant.
And I don't know about you, but I found that the most fascinating and most energizing part was the first few times that I noticed hope turning into belief.
Yes.
Have you experienced that?
Absolutely, yes.
Because you can start feeling hopeful and you don't really believe it, but you're hoping it's going to happen, but you really don't believe it. And then for whatever reason, because you've been working so hard at improving your attitude, or maybe just good things were happening in your life or whatever, all of a sudden it starts turning into belief, and it's like the whole thing gets ratcheted up about 10 times over.
Yes, and that's what I love. I love this idea that everything translates. The belief system, when hope become belief can lead to action. And all of this, how this process comes up, it describes the spirals. We often mention the downward spiral and the upward spiral. For so long, I often heard when I mention the upward spiral to people, they look at me like, what? And they have no problem accepting the downward spiral. But
isn't that weird?
Yeah, but the upward spiral is baffling to them. And I try to get people to understand the upward spiral is one spiral can't exist in only one direction. Everything balances itself. So if there's downward spirals, there's upward spirals. And when you're in that upward spiral, most people have been conditioned to shut it down, saying, oh, let's, like, knock on wood, that was good, but that doesn't mean anything. Let's not get too confident. No, an upward spiral is things are great. Let's keep that going. Look at that.
Interesting thing, Joel. We started off talking about the crazy political landscape and how negative it is and how draining it is and how it's got everybody basically tearing their hair out and gnashing their teeth about how horrible stuff's going to be. And when you're in that place, it seems impossible to get out of it. But we described steps that you can take to basically shift the mindset. We talked about a lot of stories, personal stories from our own lives and stories from other people's lives. And look at us. We're almost an hour later. We're almost done with our allotted time here. And the mood that you and I are in, and that I'm sure our listeners are in, is dramatically different. It's 180 degrees different from the mood when we first started. Because when we first started, we talked about that horrible political stuff. And now we've almost forgotten about it.
And that's the point. That's what we try to capture every week. But we do this today. We've done it very well today. Of yes, that stuff exists, but our filter can be turned off from that. That filter,
yes.
And it's not relevant to how you feel today. It doesn't really matter that all that's going on, because your independent life today is in your control. You get to choose these things. You're not a victim of all that stuff. It's not real. And that's the piece that is so freeing when you understand you don't have to be fed that line. You don't have to buy what they're selling. This is such an amazing internal discovery. You can change your life by changing the way you feel, and you're in charge of it all. You're not some victim of some random thing happening in your life. You get to choose this. And I think that on some level, for some people, that's super exciting and also super scary. Because
it is, and it's also scary at another level because it's a special kind of victimhood. It's voluntary victimhood.
Yes, and it's just the message of hope. The everybody that's listening, no matter what you're going through, no matter what you're dealing with, it seems overwhelming. The reason you're listening to this show, the reason you woke up this morning, if you can admit it to yourself, is it wouldn't make any sense unless you had hope. There's better stuff ahead. And you internally know that. That's why we wake up. We know that there's something possible that could be better. If it weren't, it would make no sense to wake up. But when you do start to experience the stuff and you feel it and say, oh my gosh, this is what they're talking about. This is how people live. This is how people feel. And life is so much different once you understand that. It's an incredible feeling.
I'm going to close on another Sean Aker story, the one that he tells about his brother-in-law who's the medical student.
Yes.
Remember that one?
Yes. Oh, favorite.
Apparently his brother-in-law called him up one day and said, Sean, I have leprosy, which, as Sean says, is extremely rare at Yale University Medical School.
You're right.
And he didn't have a heart to chew him out or give him a hard time about it because just the week before he'd gotten over 2 weeks of menopause.
Right. You see that. I love that because medical students hear all these descriptives of diseases and conditions, and they start diagnosing themselves because they're so general, and they start to buy into it. You know, I find that just so very amazing, the power of the mind, what we attract, what you're exposed to. There's been cases of very rare cancers that doctors who study those rare cancers develop the rare cancers. That's always been, and also when they realized it, they were able to say, well, that's odd. I don't have the genetic marker for that. and you know, it's, you get all that. You surround your world with, when you surround your world with what you want to happen, what you really see, look for the great, the good, the positive, that changes everything. It really does. You feel better. You are as healthy as you believe you are. I believe that with all my heart.
And how nice to know that because we have that ability, it really is in there. It's just a question of drawing it back out and using it again. We really have no limit to what good things we can attract into our lives just by deciding to think about stuff differently and feel stuff differently. It's the coolest thing in the world.
Exactly, Walt. One thing in closing I would like to leave with our audience, just remember, you are your only limit. That's it.
Oh, good phrase. I like that one. Put that one on the wall this week. You are your only limit. Absolutely. Joel, I say it every week, but it's especially true this week. It has been a pleasure as usual.
Great show, Walt. Thank you for your time, and thanks to our audience for listening.
We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.